Hey everybody, Dave Costello here, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow and host of Growing Your Firm podcast. Today's guest is Jeff Jacobs. He's the Director of Development at Wilkins Miller. And we're going to dive into this interview. We're going to talk about when does it make sense to get a Director of Development? We're going to talk about even if you can't get a Director of Development, how can you infuse some of the best practices in your firm? Jeff works at a top 400 accounting firm, and he's seen all the nuts and bolts of what it takes to kind of put a program together. So we're going to dissect what that looks like, how to think about client acquisition, and I'm sure so much more. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey man, David, I really appreciate you having me on. I'm actually a big fan of the show. I've taken away a lot of ideas from the show and tried to implement some in our firm. So anyways, it really is a privilege to be here, and I'm pumped.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about what does a director of development do? Let's just start with, foundational elements to kind of set the stage of what we're going to talk about.
So I'm aware of many hats, right? Even though we are a top 400 firm, it's not like we have a growth development staff of, 10 or 12 people. It is myself as the business development director, and we also have a marketing director who I work very closely with. And so a lot of what I do is based around client acquisition. So really, I'm involved in the pursuit of new clients and new business. And then a lot of that also kind of spins into client retention, right? So as you're pursuing new business, a good majority of that, actually at this point, what we have decided, and we can get into that later, a good majority of that has sort of revolved around more serving our current clients and making sure that we are doing everything we can for them before we go spin our wheels trying to go get new clients. And so it's mostly the pursuit of new clients and then a lot of client retention.
Awesome. And, I think it's probably evolved, but how do you think about this pie chart today of time spent on expansion with current versus new?
So, man, great question. It's really interesting. So what we have decided in our firm for right now, for where we are, everybody's experiencing people issues, right? Everybody's experiencing capacity issues. So, for us to go out and just try and acquire every brand new client we can just doesn't honestly make a ton of sense, because what we want to do is we want to serve our current client base really, really well. So what we have decided as a strategic direction for our firm, this is not every firm, but for our firm, is we want to focus probably maybe like 90-10 where we are right now. We really, really want to focus on our current client base and making sure we're serving them in every possible capacity. And, there's a statistic out there, I think Hinge put it out, but 2/3 of your clients are looking for a service you already offer. They just don't know you offer it. And so knowing that fact, there's so much more we can do. We can help them by serving them, but in the middle of helping them, we bring on new services and bring new revenue into the firm. So it's a win-win, and for us, that's kind of where we are.
Got it. And let's rewind a little bit. I do want to dig into the systems for both new and current expansion and what makes sense. But when you started at the firm, was it about the same size? And I guess walk me through, because it's not like you've had 7 roles in accounting. You really kind of jumped in this industry and kind of scaled up from there. So I guess what did you see in the job posting that got you excited? And then when do you think is the right size for a firm to hire somebody full time?
So start with the first part, and I may have to get you to repeat the second question, but
no worries. Okay.
So the first part is what got me excited about the role? So I was coming from IT, right? So I was selling managed IT services to CEOs, CFOs, largely inside the healthcare industry. And so the company I was working for got acquired. So it just didn't make sense for me anymore to stay there. So I actually found a job posting for a much larger firm in Nashville that it was a business development manager position for an accounting firm. And so I looked at that and I really gave it some thought, and I thought, there's a lot of similarities between IT and accounting, right? Long sales cycles, lots of trust. You don't just hand over the keys to your IT closet, and you don't just hand over your financials to just random people. It's very technical. It's a totally separate language, right? It's just so many things match. And so I have a friend here who is a partner. And so I actually played basketball with him for years. And so I said, hey, I'm thinking about taking this job in Nashville. It's for a bigger firm. Would like to just talk to you about it and see what you think. And then we went to lunch, and he said, we've actually thought about that for our firm. And I was like, okay, let's talk. And so a couple months later, I had the job. So it was the match between what I was already doing and where I felt like my skill sets were that really pushed me forward and said, you can do this, even though it's totally separate from what you've been doing. So
I love that. So I love the relatability of the industry because I think we've talked about hiring development, hiring sales in this industry. And this has been kind of a black box for us, which is like, where do you find relatable talent? Because there's only so many director of developments in the accounting industry for you to try to recruit to and from. But IT is so relatable. And so I think it's very interesting that if listeners are going out and trying to look for a role, then take a look at folks in IT. It makes total sense. And I think there's probably, well, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe more of an inclination to hire director of development or senior sales folks in IT than there is accounting. So you probably have a broader applicant pool if you start trying to recruit from that arena.
yeah, I mean, I think what you would want to do is you want to look in those industries that have a complex sale, right? So multiple decision makers, long sales cycles, those kind of things where you almost maybe even sometimes have to challenge. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Challenger Sale, but sometimes you just kind of have to be more the consultant than the sales guy. So any industry where you find that, I mean, insurance is really great. Oftentimes that's very consultative. IT, very consultative. Professional services in general, honestly, is a great place to find those folks. I think it translates beyond that too. You could probably find other industries as well.
I love that. So look at relatable industries and sharpening your basketball skills, and you might as well find yourself.
Yeah. Well, obviously you don't have to be good at basketball to get a job, right? Because that's not
you just got to get on the court. You just got to play and get in the arena and see what happens. That's amazing. And what do you think is the appropriate firm size where, or is it revenue? Is it client? Like, if you're a 2-3 person shop, it might be overkill. You might need to grow a little bit more. Is about 90 employees about the right range? Is a little bit lower? Like, how do you feel about that?
That's a tough question. It's going to depend. It really depends on the culture of the firm. That's my honest answer there is, some firms are very growth oriented. And some firms are not. Some firms just want to take care of their clients. They want to grow organically as that happens. But some firms really want to press the gas, right? And so if you have growth goals that are extensive, if you've got big growth goals, one of the issues in this industry is that the people who are supposed to be doing the selling are also on the production line, right? So if you're a partner or you're an owner or whatever, and you're trying to go out and get new clients, but you're also, spending 80 hours a week on tax returns during busy season, it may be time, right? It may be time if you've got really aggressive growth goals. And so I would say it just depends on the culture and what you're looking for. Obviously there is a point where it doesn't make sense. I would say, 20, 25 people inside the firm, maybe not. You're still really just trying to get your feet under you is what I would say. But beyond that, I would say just look at the culture. What are you trying to achieve? Look at your goals and then match that up with, okay, do we need someone else out there because I can't afford to go spend the time doing this? So
yeah, I don't know. I'm going to throw out something controversial, and if somebody listening and says you're crazy, then email me and let me know. But I mean, I think this whole thing of like defaulting to the partner as rainmaker while also expecting a certain level of production is, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes an excuse to not make a hiring decision for director of development or actually build out a sales team, and it just feels very antiquated. And I think there's a world in which you can hire people like yourself and still build a great relationship and be very empathetic and consultative in the sales process. And, the partner could assist there perhaps, but you're right. If there's any expectation of production from the partner, then I don't know why you're trying to have this individual split so many different roles when you could just have somebody take ownership, because what happens? Something has to give. Right? There's no such thing as two priorities. It's the priority production, is the priority rainmaking. And typically it's production because that's where their expertise is. And then there's a little bit of like acquisition type things that kind of go on the side. And that's largely through word of mouth and organic. And I don't think you're ever going to kind of be happy with your growth beyond your word of mouth if you don't actually think about building a real team behind acquisition. And I'll get off my horse for a second.
No, I don't disagree totally. I do think there's obviously a place for partners as rainmakers, 100%. But what what they can't do, what they don't have time to do, is sales enablement, right?
Yeah.
So we're better together than we are as an individual. And so
Yes. Yeah.
that's
Well said.
that's what my job is. My job is almost to enable our team to then go out and sell. So because that creates scale, right? So as you're trying to grow your firm, you can't be the only person that's out there bringing in business or knows how to bring in business. You've got to bring other people along. And so partners that are trying to bring in business, but also bring someone else along, and also on the production line, and also doing all the administrative duties that partners have to do, the billing, all the things, right? I mean, because it's not just doing the tax returns and business development. I mean, there's so many administrative duties that are on these partners' plates, right? And so many capacities. And so I don't disagree. I do think that there is a place for partners to go out and bring in new business. That has to happen. But if you want to grow and you want to scale, then I do think you have to create a team. And honestly, there's a whole different skill set too with that. And there's a whole different skill set between being strategic and building a team of people and just going out and getting the business. So
how would you define sales enablement?
Great question. Sales enablement is what it sounds like. It's education, right? It's teaching the team about our service lines. They need to understand why we want to grow. I think that's hugely important. I think in some firms that gets lost. Like, why is it that as a firm we need to grow? And one of those reasons is just out of the gate, we generally, I think there's another Hinge study that was done that said 5% of your client base is just going to leave through natural attrition, and another 19% is just one-time projects that don't carry over to the next year. So you've got 24% of your revenue that's gone year over year. That's where you start from, right? So they need to know those things. You've got to educate them and know, like, look, if we don't grow, we die. So I think there's an education piece. The enablement piece comes in with getting the partner group or the managers or the senior level folks to coach as well and bring them along to meetings and sales meetings and those kind of things. And so all that has to be very intentional, and you have to have somebody driving it, right? Most people know what to do in business development. They know how to develop business, but they're not confident in it, and they don't have anybody driving the process. And so really that's what that means to me, I suppose.
So Jeff, I want to switch gears a little bit and dig into acquisition systems that you've helped support and build out, as well as expansion systems. I will say you've mentioned Hinge. You mentioned stats from Hinge a few times. And I was like, I've never heard of Hinge. So I'm like, I'm going to document Hinge so we can link it up in the show notes. So Hinge, if you Google it, it says the punchline says it's the dating app designed to be deleted. So I think what I found and what you're referring to are two different things.
Definitely.
I'm like, I don't know. I'm not in the world of dating apps, so I'm like, goodness gracious. Okay,
no, me either. Too. Married with 4 kids. So
what's
happily,
Hinge? Where are you getting these stats? Because I think these are wonderful.
So Hinge Marketing. So they're
okay.
just a research firm that does research on different industries. We purchase a study from them that talks about, business development compensation. What should that look like? How much money should you be spending on your marketing in comparison to the size firm you are? Those kind of things. So Hinge is a great resource. Highly recommended.
Love it. So we'll link up Hinge Marketing, and we'll get some people from there that can even jump on and talk about even additional stats. So we'll make sure it goes to Hinge Marketing and not some random dating app.
Yeah, let's not do the dating app. That could be bad.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's transition into acquisition. Let's transition into expansion. I know you said 90% of efforts in expansion, but I do want to touch on acquisition for a little bit. And so I guess what was the state of acquisition prior to you coming in? And then how did you think about optimizing or evolving that system?
Yeah. So the state of acquisition was when I came in was we're in the South, right? The deep South. So everything is very rural based. So there's there's a whole lot less of just going out and producing really great content and then that bringing in clients. It's those things legitimize our business, but the majority of our business is coming from relationships. And so a lot of the incoming business that was coming into the firm was coming from existing relationships, and that's still the case. It's just what we're trying to do is press the gas on those things, be a little more strategic. For instance, bankers tend to be a great resource for us. Attorneys tend to be a great resource for us. Well, it's one thing to say, all right, we want to be friends with bankers and make sure they're sending us business. It's a whole nother thing to create a list of the top bankers in your area and then assign ownership of those bankers to individuals within the firm and say, all right, you own these 3 or 4 bankers. We need to make sure we're having lunch or coffee with them every 6 months, every quarter, whatever that looks like. So really being very intentional. And then, the other thing that I would say is when you're asking for referrals and those kind of things, one of the things we try to be very strategic about is knowing who we're looking for, right? So some people, a lot of firms will go to what I call a center of influence or a banker or whatever you want to call it and say, hey, when you think of accounting, think of us. That's great, but what happens?
They forget you. It's easy.
Yeah, they forget you. So there's so much information out there about relationships, specifically on LinkedIn. We utilize that pretty heavily. And so you can go look at that banker and you can find out what relationships does that banker have within the community, match that up with your prospect list and say, hey, Mr. Banker, I see that you know Bob. Would you mind making an introduction to Bob? Right. So you're way more strategic in that way, as opposed to asking them to think of you. You help them think of who they should be referring. So that's something we try and do to continue building those relationships. And so, yeah.
I love it. Okay, well, let's switch gears. I know, especially in a potential downturn, recession, whatever we're calling the state of the economy, it changes based on what headline is being punched down in a given week. But I love the idea that it is clearly more profitable and efficient to think about expansion because you already have that relationship. And so switching gears to the other end of the funnel, what have you started to implement or optimize from a client expansion or client retention perspective?
So a couple things. One thing that in talking to our clients that in just random conversations, I began to notice was they just want more. Right? They're paying money and they just plain want more. And what they mean by more is what I found is just proactive communication. They don't want to have to call you to present ideas. Mm-hmm. They don't want to always just be handling the next fire or the next deliverable that's due them. Right. They really want to talk about their business and their growth and, the top line, right? How can we grow the top line? A lot of times accountants are just dealing with the bottom line. But if we can help them with those top line issues, that's what they're really interested in. How do we bring in more sales? And that's going to be different in every single scenario for every single client. That is a difficult thing to do. But half the time they just want to know you care. Right? They want to know that you are interested in the success and growth of their business. And so one of the things that we've done, which is the benefit of having a business development person, is we've implemented something called client check-ins. So what that is I have free reign to call any client that I want. And the whole purpose of that call is for me to set up a meeting where the only things we talk about are 1, how are you, Mr. Client? And 2, how are we? How are you and how are we? So how are you doing and how are we doing compared to the expectations that you have for us? And then when you ask those kind of questions, obviously there's a ton of follow-up questions that come from that. But when you ask those kind of questions, man, just the conversation just goes through the roof. You all of a sudden start having new service type conversations because, they're like, we've got this new building project that we're working on. Well, all of a sudden, a 179D credit comes up and you're like, okay, yeah, let's help you with that. We can save you some money here. So you're serving, you're being proactive, and you're getting new services all at once. And so client check-ins have been a great thing for us because it's so proactive and that's what they want. They just want to hear from you and know you care. So
yeah. Is there a way, is it so organic? Does it typically happen exactly like you mentioned where it's 100% organic, or have you found ways to, or do you need to find ways to bridge the gap between how are you doing to, here's some pain points and here's how we can help? I think there's a hesitancy sometimes in our community to have calls that then get bridged to services because they have a allergic reaction to accidentally going into a sales conversation, and sometimes with good reason, right? You don't want to go in and bait and switch, right? Like, but at the same time, you're doing a disservice if you're not bringing these up. And so is it a matter of being inquisitive and then it comes up through the inquisitive nature, or have you found bridge questions, or how do you set expectations where you might talk about services, right? If meaningful or necessary.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And I really think, what do I really think about that? I think there are certain times where it does make sense to press the gas. I think I've said that too many times in this interview. I'm push the envelope. I need to find a new phrase.
It's all good.
but there are times where you really need to do that. And really what I was taught early on in my sales career is it's all about belief. It's all about what you really believe, right? So the only reason you're nervous about having that sales conversation is because you think you're taking something from them, but you're not. The whole point of the conversation is you are serving them, you are helping them, you are giving them something they need. And so if you believe that, right, if you get that head trash, is what we used to call it, out of your head, and you believe that your services are helpful, then it becomes an easy conversation to have, and you become consultative, and it just flows a little easier. So one, I think you really have to work on your belief. You have to work on the belief that what we're doing is helping the clients. I'm not taking anything from them. And then, there are certain things you can do. Like you always want to make sure you're going deeper and getting them to think more. So I would always lean on ask more questions, ask clarifying questions, make sure you're headed down the right track, ask probing questions, tell me more about that. How have you done this in the past? What are you doing to handle that now? Those kind of things. So really good question asking, lines of questions, which you can prepare ahead of time for meetings, will bring that conversation up more naturally, where it doesn't feel, like you just pushed it on them. So.
Yeah, I feel like you need to be, if you do the questions or the series of questions correctly, you should almost be enthusiastic to bring up the service you're talking about. That's kind of how I feel like you've gone deep enough. You're saying like, oh my gosh, we can really help you here, and the confidence kind of shows as long as you understand the pain well enough, or where their goals are, and you're hearing things like the building tax credit. That should light you up. Be like, oh my gosh, we could save you X%, or probably, roughly this range of dollars. Like we have to do this, right? You have to have this kind of like conviction. You only get there by asking questions. That's right. Have you ever seen the movie Inception? Yes. That's what we're doing. It needs to be their idea. Like you want to lead them down a path where it makes logical sense. The next step would be for us to help them, right? And you do that through a series of good questions. So. Yeah, I love it. Well, one final question, and I think we can talk about this world forever, but I wanted to ask one question, which is, you mentioned the word beliefs and your belief going into the call. And so I guess, what has been some of the most impactful books or courses or leaders that have had a big influence on you? Because I think the psychology and mindset is so important in this arena. And so what's been a big influence on you in your... So this is going to be less helpful. My dad, for one. My dad was a college baseball coach. And so his whole skill set was around leadership and trust building and those kind of things. And so I guess, one, make sure you have a good coach. Have a mentor, have someone that, you can lean on, and those little truisms, that come back to you in the moment when you need them. Simon Sinek, I lean heavily on him for belief and, understanding what we're doing. We're playing the infinite game, not finite games. Like, we want this to be a successful business 100 years from now, not today, which, that impacts like what types of clients we bring on, because then we want clients that make sense. We're not just trying to make a buck now, but we want really profitable clients. And so Simon Sinek has been extremely helpful for some of my thought processes. Cal Newport, he's got a lot of good books out there. There's a book called Essentialism. I think it's by Ian McKeown or something like that. And in that book, he talks about how, one of the biggest inhibitors to rock stars in any industry is their belief that everything is important.
and they can't learn to say no. And so that was a really great book for me, because I am a dad. I do have 4 kids. I have a wife and, a church family that I'm super close to and all those things. And so you have to say no at some point. And so learning to say no is a huge thing. That was a great book. So.
Yeah, gosh, I think we can do like a whole episode on saying no, right? Because this is a very psychologically hard thing to do, especially if you're a firm owner, and kind of what got you your initial level of traction was saying, yes, I'll figure it out. Yes, I'll figure it out. Yes, I'll get the business.
Right.
And then it becomes really hard to break a habit that kind of got you to a level of success.
100%. 100%. It's, but you really, there are things that are more important than growing a firm. There just are. I have 3 boys. They're all playing baseball right now. I want to be at every single one of those games. And so what I have to do is set up systems that work for me, so that way I am as here and present and as effective as I can be at work. But that's only so I can be with them. I'm not working. I'm not resting to work. I'm working to rest. So.
Well, let's double click on that a little bit. I know we have to wrap up here soon, but so what's one system that's allowed you to do that? Or what's an example of a system that allows you to do that?
Oh man, I have so many, but I'm so forgetful, right? And I really have to have everything written down, or else it's gone. If it's not written down, it literally doesn't exist. And so I read a book by David Allen called Getting Things Done. I don't know if you've ever read that book. It's an excellent book, and his methodology is great. And so I use a platform called Todoist that I build out all my projects, all my personal things, all my work things, and everything goes in there. And then the thing is if I know that everything is in that one place, it frees up my mind. That's the principle behind David Allen's book, is our minds were made for creating, not for storing. So if I try and use my brain to store information, it's not at its highest and best use. So I get it all out. Everything's in one place, a place that I can trust and go back to anytime I need it. And then that way, that allows me to be present with my kids or my wife whenever I'm there, because I'm not worried about the other things. So just building that system in, that when it comes to my mind, I have a place to put it. So
I love it. So a centralized cloud-based system that allows you to store to-dos and manage client work is deeply, deeply important to having a great work-life balance. If I'm reading between lines, I know this is a Jetpack promo without you meaning it to be a Jetpack promo, so I appreciate that. But I mean, it's a great concept where, sometimes we think about calendar hacking, or we think about maybe overcomplicating a system, but starting with it doesn't belong in your brain, I think is really important. And I love that quote by David Allen. Well, Jeff, this has been a lot of fun. I think we can go down a lot of rabbit holes. We might have to do a part 2 here in the future, but if somebody listening wants to follow up with you, connect, reach out, dig into some of your business development mindset materials, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so you can always find me on LinkedIn, Jeff Jacobs with Wilkins Miller. Just look me up there. And then our website, wilkinsmiller.com, you can find me there. And so, yeah, I love to dialogue about this. I love to have conversations and be helpful. And so anyways, yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk.
Yeah, so there it is, growing your firm community. Bombard Jeff's inbox and calendar with requests, and pick his brain, get him coffee, shoot him a lunch, whatever it may be. This has been a real treat, and if you enjoyed this interview, please leave a review. Helps us get the word out. If you really loved it, this really sparked something different for you, and you need to share it with the community. Share it with a fellow firm owner that needed to hear something today. It's the best way to say thank you to Jeff. It's the best way to say thank you for us as the podcaster. And Jeff, again, really appreciate you being on the show.
No, it was a blast. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it.